All right, I'm here to talk today about a new design tool that I've been working on for quite some time. It's a design tool for early stage value creation. I've been working in that space for some time now. Yeah, there I am. I first worked at Frog Design. I don't know how many of you know that. It's an innovation design consultancy. Basically, Fortune 50 companies would come to us, so like Coke or Toyota or Disney, AT&T. They would give us basically briefs to create new products, new services, new experiences that were not part of their mainline revenue, not part of their cash cows. And so it was innovation. And I worked there for about 11 years. I was the ECD for the headquarters studio out in California. And after a while, I realized that what I was actually practicing was executive-centered design, not user-centered design. I was helping executives get promotions, but we weren't actually launching or shipping anything, and it became kind of exhausting making PowerPoint decks. So I kind of had a radical transformation. I shifted gears, and I started to work for nonprofits, and specifically nonprofits who are developing software products, which is kind of a very small space. One that we all know pretty well is Mosaic and the browser, Firefox, right? But the one I worked for was Internet Archive, archive.org, Wayback Machine. I don't know if many of you know that. Right on. It's the 6th most trafficked website in the world. And it had also been left fallow for about 13 years, literally unchanged in its design, its UI and its UX. So that was my role, was to come in and help them create a new suite of products, effectively creating Twitter and Pinterest and YouTube and all of the other kind of media models out there that had been developed for software products in corporate worlds inside of a nonprofit. A lot of early stage value creation. One funny note for those of you who are Archive fans, the original design of archive.org was the template that came as a tutorial in the original package software of Dreamweaver. So, as a nod to that, when we redid the design for the first time in 13 years, and the design you can see right now if you go to archive.org, we used Bootstrap. So, I ended that era of my career pretty happily because I then jumped into what I saw was finally the sweet spot for me, which was accelerators, but ultimately early stage value creation in the form of startups. And it was a playground for me. It really helped me understand this specific design problem that I'm going to talk about today in a fashion that I think may be instructive for any of you who are working on early stage value creation. One small check, Evan Litvak. I don't know if you can notice this, but that's you in the left-hand side there, yeah? We've been working together for 10 years is how old this photo is. OK. So over these few decades of working in these types of environments, I learned basically that you really, it's a very difficult process to go from MVP to PMF. And this design tool I'm here to present today is really here to help move you from one stage to the other. A word on MVP, OK, we hate it, we love it, it's a word, it doesn't matter. SLC, last night when I was going to bed, I realized SLC from Joseph Talks, I think yesterday, it was Salt Lake City also. Did you all get that? OK, sorry. So, whatever what you call it, you've got to put something out in the market first. And how you get from there all the way to finding, basically, product market fit is a very complex challenge for early stage value creation companies, and it's existential. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of stress there. So this tool is primarily used for startups, yes, but it can also be used for larger companies who are trying to innovate new products, services, or experiences. So the reference design is a new tool for innovation design, and I am really excited to share it with you today. I really do hope you come find me after this talk, ask me questions, have objections. Maybe you've done something similar to this. I say it's a new design tool. I get it. There's nothing new under the sun anymore. It's kind of pastiche to even say something is new. I was talking to my son about this the other day. He's 15. He basically has that kind of nihilist teenager thing going on where like, nothing's new, everything's been done already. And I was kind of challenging him on that. And I say, OK, because his whole point is like, if you can think of it, the internet has it, right? And so I said, OK, Miley Cyrus riding a flamingo. And sure enough, he turns his laptop around and shows me Miley Cyrus riding a flamingo. So I get it. Nothing's new. OK, so what's a reference design? The tool is new, but the term of art isn't. And if you've ever been exposed to the sort of process of hardware component manufacturers working with OEMs, you might know about this tool called the reference design, or this process called a reference design. It's typically when a supplier, a vendor, makes a component that they want to express or demonstrate to an OEM or manufacturer what that component is capable of. So let's take Intel. Intel's a chip manufacturer, and they have a new chip. And they want to demonstrate the capabilities of the chip, the number of floating point, whatever, the GPU integrated system on chip, whatever it is, they want to demonstrate it. And so they will create a reference design. And that is to say, they will create a full personal computer as a blueprint, as a model for an OEM, say Samsung, to be able to understand how to use that chip. All right? And then Samsung takes that reference design, and it lets them get to market much quicker with a new computer because all the basics, all the fundamentals, all the building blocks have already been done for them. The critical thinking part of that has been done. The foundation has been done. Samsung, the OEM, whoever, gets to work on the customization. They get to work on the part that matters, that's different, that's new. And it's this relationship that's important to understand the purpose and use of the tool I'm going to talk about today, because what I'm saying is the design team, or your innovation team, or the team that's responsible for forward thinking in your organization, makes a reference design for the rest of the company to use. You know, it's like a way for the design team or whomever to postulate, to say what could be by thinking about the larger system at play. And it's up to the organization ultimately, and I'll show you in this process how, to align on that what if and turn it into a what is. But ultimately, it's a way of directing and aligning the team, which sounds a lot like vision. And I want to talk about that word today. It's come up a lot already this morning, but yesterday's presentations as well. And I have spent so much time working on this design tool precisely because over my 2 decades, I have been exhausted by realizing that visions are just that. They really are hallucinations. They're abstractions. They're words whose meaning is ultimately not shared. And as a result, misalignment. You don't have team direction. Words that never meant anything, they're abstract to the point of useless, kind of like stock photography. Which is too bad, because I actually believe that all successful products on the market did in fact have a point of view behind them, a vision behind them. And the thing about point of view is that it's a point. It comes from a specific point of view, the person, the singular person who has that point of view. And literally, this is the visionary, right? This is the person who sees what's possible. And who that visionary is really important. You know, what power do they hold in the organization? You know, what rigor do they have in communicating with clarity that vision? And how can they hold on to that vision as it changes, right? New learnings, things do change, and you have to change your vision and communicate again that vision and its change. That's a lot. And so your ability to do that determines the degree of alignment, determines the direction and success of your organization. Now, sometimes it does work by dint of a unique personality. We love this hero myth, and it's not a myth. These people are real. They do exist, really strong people who have very strong points of view about the world that can clearly communicate them to an organization and direct and align them towards a successful outcome. But more often than not, it doesn't work that way. Right? And it's kind of somewhere between a boogeyman, an elephant in the room, or a black box, but we kind of don't talk about it. And as a result, vision became a process. Vision became a team meeting, or many of them. Because we can't just say, hey, you're the CEO, or you're the head of product. It's your job, do it. Instead, like, this is a great screenshot from an agile methodology, right? Like, think about all of the points of view coming in to this abstraction called solution vision. Who actually rationalizes those orange arrows? Whose job is that in the process? You know, a lot of times we hear people say, the vision, right, it's our North Star. I heard it this morning, I've heard it a dozen times yesterday, you'll always hear it. The thing about a North Star is you never actually get there. Right? You actually have to put a vision on the horizon that you can get to if you want it to be a vision that you realize. And you never get to Polaris itself. You just get further on the land. So I've worked with a dozen of CEOs. Here are some of them. And I can tell you what I've learned in all my decades is that it does start and stop with the visionaries, with the leaders, with the heads of product maybe, CTOs, but fundamentally the people whose job it is. It's in their job description at that existential early stage value creation to make sure that everyone knows what the vision is. It's not a process. And I've learned something that no CEO will really tell you directly, which is that it's terrifying. It's a really terrifying job to be the head of an organization or the head of product or whatever and be responsible for a vision. And you will. You'll federate it, and you'll actually bring in people to a process, and you'll try to make it collaborative by that means of making sure there's alignment because they were part of it. But that's actually a really ineffective way to develop vision. It's not a point of view. It gets watered down in groupthink. So today I'm going to talk about these two folks, Mike and Jake Adams, these visionaries who work at Grain. They're CEO and head of product. And in this case study, you can swap them, please do, with the people in your own organization who you know are entrusted with the job description, effectively, of writing and communicating the vision for the company. Before I jump in, I got to do a little bit of backstory on what Grain is so that you understand the product. You can see we've sponsored the conference today. I think you'll get a real kick out of this. Grain.co. So Grain is just a very simple way to tag and share moments from your Zoom calls. So you can do that live, you can do that post hoc, but you have a Zoom call, and you want to make a note, you want to make a highlight, you want to basically save it, right? And so it automatically, in the real time again or afterwards, will take that piece of media, that piece of audio, video, and you can use a transcript and select the text and change it, and you can integrate it into tools like Notion and Slack and Salesforce and beyond. And we built it for user researchers, right? Folks in this audience, basically, who are on Zoom calls to be able to, again, in real time or afterwards, make a bunch of highlights, the voice of the customer or customer calls, because when you hear and see their faces and their words, and you get the context of the recording sometimes even behind that, it goes miles towards being able to understand what's really going on in the hearts and minds of your users. Turns out it's bigger than that. Turns out it's great for sales. Turns out it's great for recruiting. Turns out it's really great for team meetings generally. People will just start recording everything, and so all the action items and the insights and everything that come out from stand-ups and whatnot get shared inside the organization. You can make stories out of them, so you can actually compile little basic videos. It's kind of Final Cut, but using a text editor. And this was the first vision that Mike and Jake developed for the company. Now, I have to redact an enormous amount of it, because it is a strategic document, and Mike would have my throat. But I did want to leave out one part, because this is the essential nature of what I was talking about, which is the part of the vision, so who's the audience, the KPIs, the goals, the objectives, great, but the part of the vision that has to do with the actual product experience is 2 bullet points big. And this isn't a fault on Mike. I've seen this, this is a very traditional archetype of a product vision, right? It's a slide, it's the natural language of executives, it has bullets. And my point is, no amount of bullets ever would allow you to get to an understanding of a product vision, ever. It is too abstract. These are just words, right? And again, Mike, I'm taking you to task, but relentlessly reduce time to value via core usability. What doesn't want that? Right, as a product. And yet, reducing time to value was one of the most important concepts that held us through that first year of design. We even codified it as finding butter, if you've read the Fred Wilson talk around that. Like, same idea. It was an important concept, but it did not define the experience for us. We needed more. This vision artifact is too abstract. And there are a lot of ways of getting the vision out of the visionary's head. You've seen these before. There's vision videos, right? The famous first sort of canonical one that many of us know is gray flannel there in the top left from Apple. But it's still a modern practice happening down there. I believe that's Microsoft's, right? But nonetheless, you can express it in pretty rich detail. But it still doesn't tell you what it is you're supposed to build. It's just more of a marketing feel, a kind of behavioral sense of like what it looks like. And then there's the other kind of side of things, which is other document types, so business model canvas, right, or product vision templates, and they're all very abstract. And so the natural pendulum swing the other way is to say, okay, fine, let's spec it all out. Let's make the whole UX, but of course, that's not a vision, right? That's just doing the work, and the map actually becomes the territory. So the essential praxis of this design problem that I've been working on for about 2 decades is how much information do you have to compress about a potential future experience without having to build that full experience in order to express it? And if you could do that, if you could find that Goldilocks zone of abstraction, then you'd be successful with getting the team directed and aligned towards an outcome. It's a Goldilocks zone. So let's take a look at what that looks like. A reference design is nothing but about 12 pieces of paper. Materially, that's all it really is. What's on the pieces of paper, though, that matters. Here's Grain's first reference design. About a dozen screens, 15 or so, I don't know. It's a series of ideas of what could be in the world. It's just an idea. What if? What if an experience looked and worked like this? Let's zoom in, take a look at one of these screens. I think the first thing we'll all notice is that it's ugly. But I want to take you one design cycle back and explain why it's ugly. Because the step before this is the step we all do in our heads and in conversations and meetings, but we never formalize. And it's what I'm advocating strongly for in this talk, is that you spend your time actually taking examples from the world that you know and think are most applicable to that component of the user experience that you want to build, and render them for the team to see. Google Photos on the left, YouTube, the script, Otter, there's actually our original Grain prototype, and then Twitter. Every one of these screenshots is an analogy. Douglas Hofstadter said famously, analogy is the core of cognition. You understand things by what they are most like. You understand new things by what they are most like. Your brain is literally wired that way for analogies. And so every one of those little screenshots that I showed you is an analogy. This is an analogy. When you see this UI of Spotify's global navigation, you understand far more than if I had just drawn up a brand new global navigation that you have never seen before. In fact, you'll probably prosecute that global navigation and ask, should it be home, should it be search or discover or what? Instead, you let it go. And more importantly, you can experience it. You can go to Spotify, check this thing out, and understand, that's what you're saying. What we're saying is a top-level, persistent, left-hand side global nav for search, browse, and discover with some room left over for personal content saving. And so we junked Google Photos, and we put Spotify in there as the global nav, right? That's the discussion. That's the mediation of the process of trying to figure out what are you trying to build. Because even if you don't know it immediately, you can go find out what Spotify looks like. You can experience it yourself as a stakeholder. That's the compression. So this process of a reference design is going out and doing what we already do, just formalizing it and finding these analogies and putting them together. And as they munge together and interact, you finally get your own version of a design. Your own proposition of what a future UX could look like. Now, I jumped you right into the middle of a process. It is a process. It's not just doing that and somehow you're done. It actually is a little bit more complex than that. And you have to start with scope. What is it in the first place you were actually trying to design? Here's examples of scope for reference design 1 at Grain and 2. Fundamentally, though, it's a really easy game. It's what value do you want to create? In the first form, you're looking at it as user stories. In the second, we got a little bit more advanced about it. Nonetheless, it's nothing but a list. Call it a wish list, call it prioritized features. It really doesn't matter. That's what you're working with. Because here's the trick with the reference design. It's not a North Star. It's on the horizon. You do eventually get there because a reference design has a shelf life. It is only useful for 6 to 9 months out. It is only useful for 2 or 3 seasons. It betrays the issue that normally comes up with advanced planning, which is what's so far in the future, and the market has changed, and customers have changed, that you actually void everything that you worked on by the time you get around to it. No, you're just going 2 to 3 seasons out. We did this right around when COVID happened. A lot changed for us. If you had done a 3-year plan, and then COVID happened, it would have been useless. A 6 to 9 month horizon, though, gives you plenty of time to work and plan towards without going too far beyond that to waste the effort that you put in. And so you got about 3 weeks, about a week of scoping, 2 weeks of divergent thinking, going out and finding those analogies and coming back and munging them together, converging them into a model. And then you're done. And in exchange for that, you get a set of canonical screens, those 12, 15, whatever, that you can then use for 6 to 9 months. It's an incredibly high value for the effort required. You invest 3 weeks, and you effectively get to 6 to 9 months. Now, at this point, a lot of companies will say, oh my God, yes, let's build this, and oh my God, what if it doesn't work? And so you evaluative test it. You take those artifacts, you take the reference design screens, and you put them in front of customers, and you ask questions, and you do a design research exercise, and you find out, is it warm? People like this. Is it good enough? If it's not, go back to the drawing board. If so, you finish the process by publishing it into the roadmap. 2 hours of work to decompose the features inside the reference design into a list of prioritized tasks. And what you have done in that 2 hours is massively reshape the talent and resources of your organization to a new direction. Everybody is now working on those things. This is your backlog. It's literally the plan. And the best part about this, the thing I love so much, and why designers really love this tool, is because you can now finally design with the future in mind. You know where you're going as a system. Remember the reference design? Intel creates a full PC as a system to show what their chip can do. You've now designed the full system 6 to 9 months out, so that when you're working on that first feature on the roadmap, you know where it's headed. And you can do this cool trick we call sutures, which are not Band-Aids. Sutures are known gaps in the UX because later, in that 6 to 9 month time frame, you'll get back to them. You can put that menu item where it belongs, not where it fits today, because you'll come back later and add all the other menu items there. So even if it's only a menu item of one that feels kind of weird for a few months, that's the scar feeling. When those stitches come out, it looks beautiful. You had a plan and a vision. So designers spend more of their time not trying to figure out where things go and Band-Aids and hotfixes, but really just judging what part of scope should we cut to make the scar look less obvious. So it brings me back to a final but really important point about reference designs, which is they're not versions. There's no 1.1, 1.5, 2.0. It's not a living document. It's a dead document. They're trees. They're pieces of paper. You literally, they're just done when you're done. When they publish to the roadmap, you don't go back to them. You don't update and keep it going. Instead, think of it as a cycle. After 6 to 9 months, you'll have gotten wherever you got, and it's usually something close to what you imagine. It's not the same, and as a result, you'll do it again, and you'll do it again. And after 3 or 4 reference designs, you'll probably get to product market fit. And that's the world of scaling and growth, and that's the world of growth design, which is a whole different ball of wax, and I'm now working on, and maybe I'll come back and talk about that in 10 years or so. But that's the reference design as a process. So here's how it started, and here's how Grain looks today. Wildly different, and that's the point. It's not a spec. OK, before I go, I have 3 common objections and 3 hot tips. First one, isn't this just wireframing? No. It's not just wireframing. It's similar in the sense that they are abstraction tools, for sure, but wireframing is a specification process. It's about dealing with flows. It's about dealing with cases. The UX of a reference design is canonically in 12 or 15 screens. That's the forcing function, to keep it from becoming an actual spec. 2, overplanning means you won't learn from the market as you go. Hopefully you heard me on this part. It's 6 to 9 months in the future, right? If you really believe that things change that dramatically and your organization is that agile to respond to things in 6 to 9 months, God bless you, don't use this tool. Teach me what you've learned. Otherwise, yes, there's fallibility. You're not going to be right, and that's why I would recommend 20% of scope in terms of time and resources of the team is left open. So when you publish that roadmap, you also publish basically empty blocks for you to do as you will, as you learn. And finally, isn't this just copying other people's work? No. Yesterday, we saw a great presentation from Gabriel about the insight he had around Zelda and the heart meter and how that was used, and literally saw it put into the product as quarter hearts to describe recommendation system feedback. We all do this. It's precedent. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, of the people in this room. So it's not copying, it's being inspired. What I just showed you in grain looks nothing like anything else out on the market. Feel comfortable in that early stage design process to copy. It's what you're doing already. OK, 3 hot tips. This isn't rocket science. Many of you could have done what I talked about today already. Maybe you already are. But nonetheless, if you do go back to your organizations and want to try this out, here's 3 things to look for. 1, accept black holes. I only have 2 minutes left. I wish I could go into this one. It'd be fantastic. I can't. But black holes basically are known design problems, really intractable ones that when you've done this reference design, you go, I don't know how that's going to work. That's OK. You don't have to solve those. That's the sort of thing you got to get used to. You'll get to that feature when it's its time on the roadmap, and then you will solve that black hole one way or another. So I can't talk about it because I don't got the time, but basically, we went through a series of different iterations in market to figure out this black hole and finally arrived at the one we did. Number 2, keep it ugly. I'm speaking to the product designers in the room. I'm speaking to the people who love to make things beautiful at every step of the process. Please do not make this beautiful. This time you spend making this beautiful is a waste of time. No one sees this thing. It's pieces of paper. No one sees this thing. It just has to communicate the essence. And finally, this is a funny one, print it out. Remember printers? Remember working in real space? So what I mean to say is don't forget it exists. We have this unique ability as humans to want to constantly redesign and rethink the things that we've already done before. Flash this at the front of a design review. Flash this at the front of an all hands. Remind people 3 months later, yeah, this is still the vision. This is still the plan. This is still where we're headed. Design teams have this encoded in them when they work with this tool. It can be more difficult for other people outside the design team to remember exactly what it was we said the plan was. But I promise you, if you can cultivate memory on this tool, you go a long way towards getting that team alignment and direction. OK, last and final slide. My biggest pitch yet for why to use a reference design. What does it feel like as a team member to use this? Design no longer becomes the block. It is an extraordinary feeling when you are days, weeks, sometimes months ahead of the other groups inside your company because you know where you're going. And everything you're designing is a principle headed towards a system with clarity that's been aligned by the CEO or product visionary of the company. You are not reactively designing features that came from who knows where. You're building towards something. And the stress relief and the joy in your heart as a designer cannot be explained. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. First question.
Yeah.
Can you give a real-life example of a suture and then removing the stitches a few months down the road?
Absolutely. A really good example might be you don't have the engineering time to build a full sort, filter kind of view model around the data that you're trying to represent. All you can do is build a one-dimensional index list of that instead, right? And so as a result, you make that its own page. You know, because you've done the reference design, that there's going to be a host of complexity and features and tools around that. And so what you do is you basically shoehorn in basic sort, filter kind of type methods at the top, but then you like leave it alone and move on. Months, weeks later, you come back and you take that kind of content view and you completely remap it in terms of think about Spotify or Netflix or any kind of Discover services for how you would actually rethink the process of actually navigating that content. And so the suture basically is you junk the entire page in that model, right? You've rebuilt an entire navigation system based more on the sort filter being present than just the content being present. So it's a shift in what's available in the UI UX.
Great. In the 3 weeks that you talked about, that you create that reference design, do you stop all iteration work to focus 100% of your time on that?
Yes. Yes. That's the investment. That's the whole point. Now, not the engineering team, right? Not in product management, not sales, not ops, the design team. And they will tell you all the time they wish they could stop and really focus on the future and the vision. This is that thing. And so yes, design stops and focuses on the reference design. And here's the fun part. If you did it right, design's not the block anyway. They're so far ahead that they have that time back now to do that work. Doesn't work in the very first time. That's the most stressful moment, right? You just got to say, OK, let's do this 3 weeks. But the second and the third, they've already recouped that time back.
Excellent. Follow-up to that, can you please say a bit more about who's involved in those 3 weeks of making the reference design? Yeah,
that's great. Basically, the stakeholders who are responsible for determining the value creation. So as I said, the visionaries in the company could be the founders, could be the CEO, COO. Sometimes it's investors. Sometimes it's external stakeholders. It really depends. The process generally, though, as I described it, is that value creation stakeholder set is responsible for creating the list of what it is that they want to see in the product. The design team goes away and comes back with a generative set, right, a divergent set of opportunities that reviews it with that team. And then you do the classical creative process of iterating and iterating. And then you eventually get with that team a directed view, the convergence of a model.
Wonderful. How do you know where the horizon is? So you talked about 6 to 9 months.
Yep.
Like, how do you decide what if that's too far?
That's right.
Or too not? Is it based off of development time?
Exactly. It's a function simply of the speed of your development team. So if you've got a really agile, really quick to deliver type, nimble even development team, you could say, sure, 6 months, right? If things do take slower, if you're a larger organization, you may not have the talent and resources, it could be 9 months. But you don't want to go much over that. So that range is really just a function of your design team, your engineering team's agility.
Last question. So when you pull ideas from existing products, do you feel like that takes away from first principles thinking, design? How do they complement or detract from one another?
I'm glad that question got raised. I think something I missed, because I glossed over it and I was going to get into that black hole problem, is that the argument is that a lot of what we're creating has already come before. You don't need to reinvent global nav. You don't need to reinvent how to edit a spreadsheet. You don't need to reinvent sharing modals. There are incredible best practices out there. What you need to be rethinking and innovating is the core value that your product uniquely is delivering. That is not the area of precedent. That's the larger body of time and effort you're spending in the reference design, is once you've collected all the areas that you need, the sort of necessary foundations, you're doing a lot of inquisition into those unique value differentiations that your product and your product alone provides. In our case, it was time-stamped notes. That's the big idea. You're taking a Zoom call and you type a note at a specific time. There were 3 or 4 other examples out there. Many of us know YouTube, where you can @sign an actual comment, right? That's a sort of a similar proxy for that. None of them demonstrated the kind of experience that we ultimately wanted to see. Much of our work during the reference design was innovating around that core differentiated concept, not things like share modals and global nav.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Let's give you another round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.